up guys? Welcome back to another episode of Dojibag Poker Vlogs. In this vlog, we're playing a session at the Gardens Casino, which is my local poker room. I don't know if it counts as local. It's like my closest poker room, but it's like 35-ish minutes away. That's still like local, right? Local's not like the same city. It's just like the closest of something to you. I actually don't know what local specifically means, but it's my closest poker room. We play a session at my local poker room, the Gardens Casino. In this vlog, we're going to be playing 5-5 with a $600 max buy-in. I get involved with some interesting hands. A lot of them kind of follow a similar theme and kind of develop the same way, but then they kind of diverge and end differently. So some of these hands are just more fun to analyze, and then other ones are kind of crazy, especially one involving an ace high hero call. So hope you guys enjoy these hands. I think you'll like them, and let's get into the vlog. In this first hand, I'm in the small blind with ace deuce of spades. This was the first hand I got involved in the session, and unfortunately my phone wasn't recording yet, but I do have this super engaging photo from after the hand, which I'm sure does the job exactly as well. There are 3 limps and I raised it up to $35. 2 of the limpers in early position make the call, so we're going 3 ways to a flop, which is 4 king 4 rainbow. Paired boards with a high card are typically going to favor the pre-flop aggressor's range, so I put out a small c-bet here of $45, and only the player in under the gun makes the call. We're going to a turn heads up, which is the king of spades, bringing a second spade on the board. This is a great card for me, not just because it gives me the nut flush draw, but also because it makes it less likely that my opponent has a king, which makes up a lot of his calling range on the flop. The board is also now double paired, which means there's a small chance that my hand actually might be good, or that we're chopping since I have 2 pair with the ace kicker. This time I check it over to my opponent. He ends up betting $75, and I'm not going to go anywhere once I pick up the nut flush draw, so I end up making the call. The river comes the jack of hearts. Unfortunately, we don't improve to the nut flush, and I'm sitting here with 2 pair with the ace kicker. I think my opponent's going to be checking back hands like 7s or 8s or something like that if I check it over to him, and I don't see myself realistically winning this hand unless I make a move here. After a while of thinking, I decide to put maximum pressure, and I put my opponent all in for 421 into a pot of 355. I don't really know how I feel about my sizing looking back at it. Maybe I could just bet like 270 or something like that and still get the folds that I need for a cheaper price. But in the moment, that's what I did. And I'm putting my opponent on maybe like 7s or 8s here or something. And I guess at the moment I thought he would fold. I could have very well played a king in this same way. After a king comes on the turn, it's unlikely my opponent has anything super strong, so I'm pretty sure if I did have a king on the turn, I'd be checking almost all the time to either let my opponent catch up on the river or to let him put out a bet, since I would have had the board so locked up. Anyways, my opponent thinks for quite a while, but then ends up making the fold. We end up getting this one through, but I'm not really sure how I feel about my sizing. I think I could have easily bet like 250 or 270 or something like that, and still had nearly as much fold equity, but for a cheaper price. But I think I tend to gravitate towards these really high variance plays. So in the moment, that's what I did. Let me know what you guys think. In this next hand, I'm in the hijack with king jack of diamonds. I open it to $20 and get called by the button and both of the blinds. So we're going 4 ways to a flop, which is 4-5-8 with 1 diamond. When the blinds check it over to me, I just decide to check. I don't want to bet with king high into 3 players, so we'll just see what develops on the turn if the button ends up checking, which is exactly what he does. So action checks through, and we're still going 4 ways to a turn card. It's the 4 of diamonds. Once again, the turn gives us a flush draw, and it also is very unlikely to have improved anyone's hands. The blinds check it over to me once again, and I'm pretty sure none of my opponents have an 8 since I would have expected them to bet that on the flop. So since no one's really shown interest in the hand, I decide to take a stab at it since I picked up equity. We also have 2 overcards to go along with our flush draw. My opponent should never really have queens plus, given that they didn't 3-bet pre-flop, so if I hit a king or jack, then I'm pretty sure my hand's going to be good. I decide to make it $35. Don't need to make it too big since, once again, my opponents didn't seem too interested in the hand. I only get called by the player on the button, so we're going heads up to a river card. It's an offsuit 8, so once again, we're playing on a double paired board. I have king high this time though, instead of ace high, so it's less likely we're going to be chopping if my opponent called me light. To be honest, I didn't really have any idea what to do in this spot. On one hand, I didn't really see that many great hands my opponent could have. As I said, I'm not really expecting him to have an 8 since he probably bets that on the flop. Maybe he has like pocket 7s here and he just ends up calling down, but besides that, I couldn't think of many other hands. At the same time, I don't think I'm getting any better hands to fold. Even if my opponent had ace high, I can imagine him making the call here. I'm not really representing that much value when I check flop and then bet turn, besides overpairs, which I could have played that way. But besides that, I also probably shouldn't have an 8 since I would be betting that on the flop a lot of the time. So I gave up on the bluff and I just checked it over to my opponent. He ends up checking back and I'm pretty sure we're beat, but when I show my king high, somehow we end up being good and my opponent mucks his hand. So we somehow win without getting my opponent to fold. Not really sure what he had here. Maybe he also picked up a flush draw on the turn, but just didn't get there. But either way, I'm happy to win this hand, especially when I gave up on a bluff and somehow won at showdown. Alright guys, this next hand is potentially the most interesting, or at least the most eventful hand of the session, and it starts off with me getting dealt ace-8 offsuit on the button. The under the gun player limps. I actually didn't realize that he was in the hand, so I raced to 25 once action folded to me, hoping to steal the blinds. Once the blinds fold though, the under the gun player ends up making the call, so I realize that he's in the hand and we're going heads up to a flop. This is once again the same player that I played against in both of the previous hands. I'm expecting him to call me light since I've shown aggression and that I'm willing to bluff. The flop comes down 5-5 queen with 2 clubs. I do have the ace of clubs for a backdoor nut flush draw. Once the under the gun player checks to me, I bet small here since it's such a dry board once again, and he ends up making the call. The turn card is pretty good. It's the 6 of clubs giving me a flush draw, and it's also unlikely to have improved my opponent's hand. Still not going to give up just yet since I don't put my opponent on much, and once again, I think he's calling me light. So once he checks it over to me again, I decide to size up this time and I make it $60. Unfortunately, he calls once again, so we're looking for some help on the river. It comes the 5 of diamonds, putting a third 5 on the board. My opponent actually leads out this time and bets $80 into a pot of $220. I don't see this bet as being that strong since it's so small and it looks like he's just trying to get a cheap showdown. I feel like my opponent's range is capped since he only limped pre-flop and then didn't 3-bet me. Because of this, I think the best possible hand he should have in this situation is 6s full of 5s if he has pocket 6s, which there aren't too many combos of. Otherwise, I think his range is going to consist mostly of Queen X and something like 7s or 8s. At the moment, I felt like an $80 bet for my opponent just seemed kind of like a scared sizing, and if he had a queen, he shouldn't be too worried in this spot since he's now chopping against any queen that I could have. Meanwhile, my range can consist of pocket queens, pocket 6s, even aces or kings, which would make for a better full house. And finally, in the previous hand, we saw that he called me down when I had king high, and then once we both checked on the river, my king high ended up being good. So there's actually a good chance he could have ace high or even worse here, and betting here could potentially get him off of a chop since he's never going to be calling with just an ace. For all these reasons, I took the most aggressive route and I just put him all in for his remaining 280 or so. Luckily, he doesn't snap call and he actually goes into the tank. He also doesn't snap fold though, so we know that he no longer has something like ace high or worse. My opponent goes into the tank for almost a full 2 minutes before finally making a decision. No sir, I do not win. You made a good call. After he calls, I tell him he's good and that I only have ace high, and he says potentially one of the most unexpected things possible in this situation. You're good. I have ace high.
Huh?
I have ace high.
Oh, yeah, me too.
No way. Are we chopping? There's no way we're chopping.
Chopping, right? Yeah.
I can't begin to tell you guys how shocked I was when my opponent turns over ace 7 offsuit. He called me on the flop and on the turn, and then on the river he makes one of the sickest hero calls I've ever seen in my life to get a chop that neither of us deserve, to be honest. Part of me is happy that I got a chop after getting called when I was completely bluffing with air, and the other part of me is just flabbergasted that he didn't fold and that my play didn't work. My opponent read my soul and I got completely owned. But all jokes aside, this is actually really good information for later in the session. It confirms my suspicion that my opponent's going to be calling me light, and now I look like a total spaz, which I probably am. This is something I could potentially use later in the session to my advantage, and all things considered, I can't really complain about getting a chop in this hand because it was completely undeserved, so I'll take it. We finally get involved in a hand that isn't against the same player as the previous ones. I get dealt pocket nines in early position, and I open it up to $20. I end up getting 4 callers, so we're going 5 ways to a flop. It comes down 7 king 9 rainbow, giving us middle set. This is very reminiscent of a previous hand in the last vlog where I flopped a set of 9s and played it in almost the worst way possible. Hopefully I don't do that this time. The blinds check it over to me, and at the time, for some reason, I decided to bet 75 into 100. I don't like this sizing at all. I think in the moment, I was just trying to get value from a king, and I figure that opponents are going to be pretty inelastic when it comes to bet sizing if they have a hand here. So I was trying to get the most value I could just in the short term. But I think that betting really big here into multiple players just looks so strong, especially on a board like this where I'm not going to have a ton of bluffs. So it makes it a lot easier for them to make a tight fold on later streets, even if they have a king with a decent kicker, simply because I'm betting so big and showing a lot of strength. I'd much prefer either a smaller bet here, maybe something like 30, or even a check to let one of my opponents catch up, or to let one of the other remaining 2 players bet. But as played, I end up getting called by the hijack. Jesus, my dogs are going crazy right now. As played, I end up getting called by only the player in the hijack. We're going heads up to a turn card, which comes the ace of spades. This is a pretty bad card because it's more likely to have improved my range than his. Most of the time, I'm going to assume my opponent has king x here, and an ace here just kind of kills action and makes it less likely that we're going to get value from those hands. What's even worse is that I don't really think about this in the moment, and at the time, I was just trying to think to myself, what amount do I bet now so that I can get it all in on the river? And I ended up kind of just estimating it and not really thinking it through, and I bet 150 into about 250 here, which I think is really, really bad. Once I raised from early position, bet on the flop into 4 other players, and then bet big again on the turn, it just makes it way too easy for my opponent to fold a king here. Also, the effective stack size is a little over 500, I think, so even if I want to set up for an all-in on the river, I could have bet much smaller, like 75 to 100, and this would achieve basically the same thing. A smaller sizing also makes it more likely that we get value from king x. But after thinking about this hand more, and also talking to my friend Chris about it, who's a much better player than me, I think actually checking here is the best option, simply because I showed so much strength before, and I think it's going to be really, really hard to get value if I continue betting. My opponent also ends up folding to this bet, so I once again played a set pretty badly. I think I just got too caught up in trying to get the absolute maximum value that I didn't really stop to consider how strong my range looks when I play like this. So I think next time I should just try to get a smaller amount of value instead of focusing so much on getting all the money in. I get another chance to extract value when I get dealt pocket aces in early position once again. I open it up to 20 and this time only get called by 1 player who's in the big blind. The flop comes down queen king 4 with 2 hearts. I do have the ace of hearts in my hand for a backdoor nut flush draw. My opponent checks it over to me, and there are plenty of hands I can get value from on this board, so I bet $25. I think I could actually go even bigger here, like 30 or 35, but my opponent ends up calling, so we're going to a turn card, which is the 6 of hearts. This is an interesting card because it completes the front door flush draw, but I also have the ace of hearts in my hand, so now I have an actual flush draw to the nuts, and I also have the blocker, which I always love having. It just makes the hand a lot easier to play. This time, when my opponent checks it over to me, I decide to bet again, this time making it 75 into 95. I can still get value from worse hands, and even if my opponent's ahead, we still have the redraw to the nut flush, so I'm never going to be too worried if my opponent ends up calling here. He actually decides on a check raise to $200. There's absolutely no way I'm folding here after picking up the nut flush draw. The question is, do I shove all in here, or do I just make the call? The effective stack size is around 750 or so if I shove here, it's going to be pretty big. I don't think a shove is ever terrible since I'm never going to be drawing dead, and even if my opponent has something like 2 pair or even a flush, I have plenty of outs. So I think shoving here could have potentially been the best option, but at the time, I just decided on the more passive line, and I just called and decided to reevaluate on the river. The river comes the 10 of clubs. We don't improve to the nut flush, and now I'm almost certain that my opponent's ahead. At this point, it was kind of a high pressure situation, and I didn't want to give away any tells, so what I usually do in those situations is that I look at the board and try not to look at my opponent or do anything that might give away the strength of my hand. And in doing this, I actually missed that my opponent ended up checking. After a while passed, I was pretty sure he had, but I didn't want to look up and check right away, so it actually took another player mentioning that my opponent had checked for me to finally realize that action was on me. And because of this, I kind of acted really quickly as soon as I realized, so I just checked back, which I really don't like in hindsight.
I checked back. Sorry, I didn't know you checked. I have aces.
I tell my opponent that I have aces, and he turns over 6-4 offsuit, which I did not expect at all.
Nice hand.
He called with bottom pair and then ended up turning 2-pair, raising, and then on the river, I guess he just wanted to get to showdown, so we end up losing this hand, and I think it would have been a much better line to either shove on the turn, or as played, I should have just shoved on the river after he checked. I think when he checks river after raising turn, it just looks like he's scared and wants to get to a showdown, and I should be punishing that, especially with the ace of hearts to block the nut flush draw. Also, given the way I played, I could still have all the really strong hands, a set of kings, a set of queens, potentially 2-pair with king queen, and of course I could have any of the flushes. And I'm pretty confident that my opponent would have folded 6-4 if I had just bombed it on the river. During the session, I actually posted this hand to my Instagram story, and a lot of people actually agreed that shoving is the best option here. Unfortunately, we lose a pretty big pot to a very unexpected holding, but regardless, I think this was a fun hand to analyze, and it's one where if I had thought longer about it, I might have been able to find the more aggressive line that could have won me the hand. Alright guys, on to the very last hand that I played for the session. I was in under the gun this time, and this was going to be my last hand before getting up. I get dealt ace-queen offsuit, and I decide to raise it up to $20. I get 2 callers, 1 in the hijack, and 1 on the button. We once again get a paired board. The flop is 4-4-5 rainbow, so I bet small here, hoping to get a cheap fold. I make it 20 into 70, and only get called by the hijack. He's the same guy who I played against in 3 separate hands this session, and as I said earlier, I know this player is going to be calling me light, so I should keep that in mind as I continue in this hand. The turn comes the 6 of diamonds. Obviously, 7-8 gets there, but once again, I think my opponent's going to be floating a lot of the time, and I still don't think he's likely to have much. And for that reason, I decide to bet again. I make it exactly half pot this time and bet 55 into 110. I don't see a need to go super big or anything, since I already expect my opponent is calling me light, and he surely can't call me down all the way with ace high again, right? Once again, he makes the call, so I'm hoping for a good river card, hopefully an ace or queen. Nope, it's the 6 of spades, which isn't a terrible card since there's 2-pair on the board. We're once again in a spot where it's very likely we're chopping with ace high. I don't see him really beating me unless he started off with a pocket pair, and I feel like I can continue putting pressure on him. If he has ace high, I could potentially get him off of a chop, so I decide to actually bet again this time, and I do something that I'm not sure what you guys will think of it, but I bet 65 into a pot of 220, which is really tiny, I know, but the reason I did this was because if my opponent has a better hand than me, he's probably not really going to be folding to any sizing regardless, so I don't think there's any reason for me to bet big and lose more money when my bluff fails. At the same time, if he has ace high or even just nothing, this will accomplish the same goal of getting him to fold, so I decided a small bet would be best here. This only has to work a little bit less than 25% of the time for it to be profitable. And then finally, we already have some history at this table. I expect him to be calling me light, so I don't think he has much once again. And on top of that, in all the previous hands when I tried to bluff him, I bet really big. So when I bet really tiny this time, it might look to him like I'm trying to get a crying call from a worse hand. Luckily, my bluff ends up working as my opponent folds almost immediately. Chances are we were actually ahead, but regardless, it's nice to win a decent sized pot before finishing off the session. I play one more orbit since I didn't want to leave after immediately winning a hand, especially against this opponent who probably thinks I'm targeting him at this point.
Seat open.
I bought in for 600 and ended up cashing out for 920 to book a solid win.
Good luck, guys. Thank you. Have a good one. All right, guys. Pretty good session today. In for 600 total and out for 920. I definitely could have played better in some spots. I feel like in the hand where I had ace-8 offsuit, yeah, that was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. He called me with ace high and then we chopped that hand somehow, so that was insane. And then in the aces hand where I had the ace of hearts as a blocker, I feel like I should be shoving there and just putting a lot of pressure on him, since I think his check on the river looks really weak. And yeah, I can potentially get him to fold maybe like 2 pair or something. I don't know. Either way, it ended up being a good session, so can't complain.
Alright guys, that's it for this poker vlog. I think some of these hands were more unusual, which I thought would be fun for the vlog. Besides that, it was just a normal session at the Gardens. I am planning on going to Vegas pretty soon, so stay tuned for some Vegas vlogs. I know I haven't posted like super frequently, but I know I haven't posted super frequent. I know I haven't posted super frequently, but I'm gonna be trying to focus more on this vlog. I have a lot more time now, so I'm gonna make the Vegas trip, try to grind out a vlog for every session in Vegas if I can. And yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. And I haven't been back there for probably 4 years now, so I didn't go throughout the whole quarantine period, and even then it was probably like a year before that started that I went to Vegas. So really excited to go back and play some Vegas poker. Definitely a lot better than California and more fun since it's just in a different city. So if you guys want to follow along with the Vegas trip and just poker sessions in general, make sure to follow Dogebag Poker on Instagram. That's where I post all my content before it gets in the vlog. Usually it's just like hand histories and stuff, but I will post also just, you know, fun little videos from sessions if anything interesting happens. So that's the best place to see content before it comes out on this channel. And yeah, besides that, you guys have a good one. I will see you in the next vlog. Peace.